Hare Krishna, Nrsimhananda.
Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
All glories. So the subject of today's lecture, we will be talking about free will. There is a lot of information about that, a lot of speculations, a lot of theories. Do we have free will or we don't?
Am I free to make that decision whether or not we're going to talk about free will?
You're kind of free, but at the same time, I will be trying all the time to navigate you towards the question. So I don't know how to answer. Probably you can think that you have free will. But I will try from my side as much as possible to make you without this choice.
You know, it's so interesting because this question has perplexed and plagued devotees for decades since Prabhupada was speaking about it. I'm sure you've read some things that Prabhupada has written or spoke about free will, is it not?
Yes, of course. Yeah, and that's the thing, in some books, he's saying that only fools can think that they have free will. And in another scripture, he will say, oh yeah, of course, God gives us free will. So we can decide, do we want to go to him or we don't want to go to him? So
well, I've taken a few quotes from Srila Prabhupada, so let's explore them and see whether or not we can find a common denominator.
I would love that.
One thing he said was that free will means you can act wrongly. That is free will. Unless there's a chance of doing wrong or right, there's no question of free will. So where is free will then? If I act only one-sided, that means I have no free will. Because we act sometimes wrongly, that means free will. So now we get into the question, what does it mean to act wrongly? Who's determining what is the right thing to do, what is the wrong thing to do? After all, Arjuna was perplexed with that very question. He felt it was wrong to fight his teachers and relatives. Turned out it wasn't wrong. So our ideas of right and wrong may not be very clear to us, or we may be mistaken. So this statement, this series of statements in and of itself doesn't really resolve the issue for us, does it? I'm asking you.
No.
No, it's incomplete because the idea is you better study further in order to understand what is the meaning of right actions and wrong actions.
And the further question, is there such a thing as a right action or wrong action? Is there really good and evil? Because from one side, it can look like it's evil, but from the other side, you will look through time and you will see, and you will say, oh my God, that was the best thing happened to me.
Right, plunging a knife into someone who's attacking your son or daughter is not wrong, is it?
No.
Or is it?
No, that's the thing.
So that there's always the question of the relative nature of right and wrong. And Arjuna was perplexed, and therefore he surrendered to Krishna and said, I don't know what to do. I'm confused about my duty. That's what he admitted. And that's really the beginning of the instruction of the Bhagavad Gita. When Arjuna finally realizes that he doesn't know what to do to actually do the right thing. And the Bhagavad Gita is a series of lessons as to how to understand what is the right thing to do. I'll give you practical examples. In ISKCON, we were doing the change up on book distribution. We were, getting people's money and then returning less than they should have gotten. And we were justifying it by saying, well, the money's used for Krishna, it's on the absolute platform, therefore it's right. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it just from that point of view, it sounds pretty right. I mean, there is in Vaishnav history in South India, there were dacoits that were stealing money from princes and other wayfarers on the road to use for the temple and for the deity. Was that right or wrong? They were glorified, actually. So you have this, you really have this conundrum, this riddle of how do I know what is right, meaning what is going to be for my spiritual benefit, and what is wrong, which will be what will be covering me more with Maya and entangling me in the material nature. So then Hari Griva said to Prabhupada, well, a man may know better, but still act wrongly. And Prabhupada said, yes, but that is free will. He misuses, just like a thief. He knows stealing's bad, but he still does it. That's free will. He cannot check his greediness. So in spite of knowing that he's doing the wrong thing, he'll be punished. He knows. He's seen another thief. He was punished. He was put into prison. Everything he knows, but still he steals. Why? Misuse of free will. This is Prabhupada speaking. Unless there's misuse of free will, there's no question of free will. These are excerpts from Prabhupada's philosophy discussions with Srila Prabhupada, and he's relating it to one of the Western philosophers, Rene Descartes. And Hari Griva is interviewing basically Prabhupada, playing the devil's advocate to try to understand some of the points of view of the Vedic philosophy in relationship to Western philosophy. So then Prabhupada also said, in a different context, he said, so everyone can know that independence means one can use it properly or one can misuse it. That's independence. If you make it one way only, that's independence. That's force. I had the experience where my mother was writing Srila Prabhupada letters to send me home. You have the power to send my son home. Home meant going back to Chicago from Los Angeles, where I was serving, and Srila Prabhupada was present there. And Prabhupada wrote back to her. He was very polite. He said, your son is an adult. I cannot force him. If he wants to stay, he can stay. Prabhupada was not he was not threatened by my mother's idea, oh, I got to please the mother. No, he was just stating it as it is. We each have our own free will, and it wasn't even Prabhupada's position to interfere with our free will. Perfectly understandable. Nevertheless, we still are faced with the issue of, well, what is a right action? What's a wrong action? How do we know? Because in another place, Srila Prabhupada speaks about suicide, and he says that suicide happens when the modes of nature overwhelm the living entity. This is very interesting. In other words, a person who's committing suicide is committing suicide in one sense against the will of the soul. Soul knows that it's sinful to commit suicide, but the modes of nature are so heavy that they can't resist it. And the interesting thing is that we still are left with the idea that if that's true for such an extreme case, then what about the idea of performing wrong, so-called wrong actions, as Prabhupada gives the example of the thief? Is that an example of where the modes of nature are overcoming the will of the soul, and you cannot resist it? So let's explore it a little more deeply, because that's really the question of the hour, don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Srila Prabhupada says in a conversation in 1976 in Mayapur, you've got a little independence, therefore you can violate. Because you're part and parcel of God, you've got independence proportionately, therefore if he likes, he can return. That independence has to be accepted, little independence. We can, emphasize can, misuse that. And then Shyam Sundar responds, but, and I always like these buts, you know, I wish there were more buts when Prabhupada had spoken. We'd probably be clearer about a lot of things. Thank goodness for wonderful, inquisitive people, intelligent people like Shyam Sundar who were present. But can we predict returning back home, back to Godhead will be permanent? Can we predict that? Just like many prisoners leave the prison, however, some do come back. Prabhupada says in response, surprisingly, because we think in our philosophy, once having attained, one never comes back to this material world, once having attained the spiritual world. Prabhupada said, no, there is no permanent effect because we have a little independence. There is nothing permanent because you can misuse your independence at any time. Shyam Sundar's shocked. He says, and some come back? Prabhupada, yes. Otherwise, there's no meaning of independence. Independence means you can do this, you can do that, all right, whatever you like. You know, as a parent, you are controlling your children up until a certain age, and then you realize that they're independent souls and they're going to make their own decisions. And no matter what you say or the amount of money you threaten not to give them or kick them out of the house or whatever it is that you've got up your sleeve as a means of force, they're going to do what they're going to do. You better get used to it. And that's the nature of the soul's relationship with Krishna, is that we have that little independence. Now, when you think, well, but it's promised that once having attained the spiritual world, one never returns to this horrible material atmosphere. It becomes a question in your mind. Well, what does it mean then I have that little independence? And I can only offer a small example. Once you burn your finger on a candle as a child, you don't stick your finger in that flame again. You don't want it. You have every opportunity to do it again, but it's too painful. That's why in the material world is considered a place of suffering. Why? Because if it was a place of enjoyment, such as the higher planetary systems, we'd be coming back time and time again. So although one has the independence to return to the material world, one doesn't do it because one's been burned, what's that saying? Burned once, twice shy. So, you don't do it even though you have the freedom to do it. So therefore, it's not done. One does not return to the material world. One does not put his finger back in the fire.
But then we have examples of people who keep doing it, who keep burning themselves and finding pleasure in that.
I don't think you're going to find too many examples of that in this world.
In the psychic facilities, there are people who likes to make the self suffer. So probably that's the souls who would like to come back.
I can only say in response to that there are certain levels of analogy or comparison materially that have its limits. The amount of suffering that one endures birth after birth for millions of births becomes inured into the consciousness of the living entity to such a degree that by the time you're purified of all material attachments, you have learned your lesson all too well. That's the only answer I can give you.
Yeah, I agree to that. Because that's the only way how we can get to God's side.
So then a devotee says, then he is so many times falling down again and again, so he's eventually permanently come back? Prabhupada, he's got independence. Therefore, there's always the possibility he can misuse the independence. He can fall down. That's why when a man is released from the prison house, that does not mean permanently, because he can come back. Again, general law is not to come back. But if he likes, he can come back. Otherwise, what's the meaning of independence? Just like one becomes free from the prison house, naturally, he should not go there again. Even though Krishna has promised there's no return to the material creation once returning to the spiritual worlds, the fact is there is return if the jiva soul wants to return, as Prabhupada explains here. So that's the difference. We have the freedom, but we just don't do it. We learned our lesson. Now Chutananda chimes in. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, once coming to the spiritual world, the jiva soul never returns. So he can return? Prabhupada. Okay, he's putting Prabhupada on the spot here, right? He's drilling. He doesn't believe it right now. It's confusing to him because he's never heard this before. So he's intelligently making sure, double checking with Prabhupada. I don't quite understand because the other statement seems to be contradictory. Please clarify. Prabhupada says, if he likes, he can return. Guru Kripa, how is it that one can become envious of Krishna? Srila Prabhupada, you got a little independence you can violate because you are part and parcel of God, and God has got full independence. But if you got independence too, proportionately, because you are part and parcel, so if he likes, he can return. That independence has to be accepted. We can misuse that Krishna, Bahirmukta Haya Boga Vachi Kare. That misuse is the cause of our fall down. Devotee, well, I believe you once said that a conditioned soul becomes perfected and gets out of the material world, and he goes to Krishna Loka, and there's no possibility of falling back. Again, now they're going even deeper. They're in disbelief. The devotees are in disbelief. They've heard this other point of view, and they've read it, they've heard it, and now Prabhupada's saying, no, not true. How would you be as a devotee? Wouldn't you be asking Prabhupada, wait a minute, hold on a second. Stop the train, right?
Rewind.
Prabhupada says emphatically, no, there is possibility. But if he does not come, if he's intelligent. Just like after putting your hand in the fire, you never put it in again. I guess that's where I got this comparison.
Right.
So those who are going back to Godhead, they must become intelligent. Why going back to Godhead? As soon as we, then that was the end of that conversation regarding free will. And later on, in a discussion in a morning walk in Los Angeles, Prabhupada said, as soon as we try, this material world is very nice. Yes, Krishna says, yes, you can go. Otherwise, what's the meaning of free will? Every living entity has got a little free will, and Krishna is so kind. He gives them opportunity. All right, you enjoy like this. It's free will. And in Los Angeles in 75, he said, so everyone can know that independence means one can use it properly or misuse it. This is independence. If you make it one way only, that you cannot fall down, that is not independence, that is force. Therefore, Krishna says, Yeta chasita tu kuru. Now you do whatever you like. That's our very famous verse in the 18th chapter to Arjuna. I've taught you everything. I've told you what's right and wrong. I've described the divine and demonic natures. I've given you a formula for living a sattvic life, making you aware of what choices you have to either go up or go down. We have that very famous painting of the staircase where the soul is either going to go up to spiritual and brahminical values or go down to hell. the choice, and Prabhupada not only authorized, he basically conceived of that painting and directed it. So, it's obvious that we have choices. But when we're trying to distinguish what is right and what is wrong, we must think, what are Krishna's instructions? He's told us that honesty, cleanliness, austerity, all these things are in the mode of goodness. So we have to choose the mode of goodness because that is the upward path. And those things that are leading to demonic qualities, cheating, lying, stealing, raping, so many abusive types of behavior, those are real choices we have. It's Krishna, I'm following his instruction to become more spiritually pure, or Maya, I care less, I'm going to enjoy my senses no matter what. This is free will. Understanding all of Krishna's instructions about how to make choices that are quote unquote right. I don't want to get into morality of right and wrong of morality, because that becomes kind of an Abrahmanic expression of being judgmental. People are making choices, and those choices sometimes are made because they're overwhelmed by their desire for sense gratification. And in that case, we have to ask ourselves, well, if there's no free will there, what the heck is going on? If they're overwhelmed, then it's really not a choice, is it?
Absolutely.
Are you with me?
Yes, absolutely.
But we also have to understand that parallel with our apparent choices that are made by the fact that the material nature is so heavy, is the process of karma. Karma is designed particularly to help everyone understand the nature of their material existence. And sometimes that karma forces us to make the wrong choices so that we can experience the mode of ignorance, this experience of how everything has an action and a reaction, so that we can then become reformed.
So Maya is our friend in that case.
Yes. So we use examples, when I get cut, I would have had my hand cut off, but because I've been doing devotional service, Krishna's so kind, he's mitigated that. A devotee always thinks, my karma has been mitigated. It has been mitigated means it's been reduced because Krishna's looking on me with great favor, and he's not giving me the full reactions to my deeds, my misdeeds from previous lives or in this life. And therefore, we're always dependent on Krishna's mercy. And when anything bad happens to us, even when we make bad choices, because we're overwhelmed and there isn't really the free will that we could make the choice, it's actually forced on us by the darkness, the cloud of darkness that comes over our consciousness. That's also for our welfare. That's also Krishna. So free will becomes much more evident as we progress to the mode of goodness. And even for devotees, you can be serving, for decades and decades, and then hit a very tough period where Maya is just coming at you. Really, it could be a disease, it could be a marriage that's going bad, it could be financial things that happen to you, it could be the reputation that is soiled for reasons that don't seem justified. It could be so many different things. It could be war. We have devotees, new devotees, practically a few years, and they're serving out prasadam in the Donbass, and a bomb falls in their kitchen and they're killed. How are you going to explain that? The only way out of that conundrum, out of that riddle, is to understand that Krishna is directing the wanderings of all the living entities. And he actually knows where we should be at every moment. We're only where we're supposed to be. If that is a consciousness that we have, then we're choosing Krishna consciousness. Even if we're in Maya, if I understand by Krishna's arrangement, I'm in Maya, that awareness itself is Krishna conscious. And that helps us. That awareness helps us even when we're forced by the strong hand of material nature to do things that are quote unquote wrong or adharmic or very ugra karma, it speaks of ugra karma. Even then, that little awareness can save us. Let's see what else Prabhupada says. Therefore, returning back to home, Prabhupada said, if you have no free will, then you're a stone. The stone has no free will. You want to be a stone? Then you must have free will, but don't misuse your free will. But don't try to become a stone either. That is not life. So he's in other places, Prabhupada has condemned blind following. Just follow, do whatever is said by the master, by the temple president, by the counselor. No, you have that. You have innate intelligence. You're not a stone. You're not a slave. Only to your senses are you a slave, a godas. But internally, the soul is not a slave. Soul is a servant. There's a difference. A servant is there voluntarily. A slave is there by force. We are a slave to our senses, but we are a servant to God. So these are some of the aspects of free will that are churned in our search to understand what is our birthright and where are our choices. And even if I'm making choices that are wrong, do I have the opportunity to have the awareness that those choices are not in my for my eternal welfare? And the idea that devotees are not thoughtful or are just some kind of a machine following a formula for trying to become liberated from material atmosphere. It doesn't work that way. The responsibility becomes for us as devotees to understand these things becomes actually greater as we read and progress in the process of the Bhakti Marg. It's simple and it's complicated, both. It's absolute. And by studying Srila Prabhupada in his entirety, his books, his lectures, his conversations, and even from the memories that devotees have of things that Prabhupada did or said, all these things combine to give us a full understanding of free will.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can you say that with understanding more of actually if being more aware of your free will of every day, you're getting more and more choices in life? So saying like, for instance, if you are more like become, like we said earlier, become more intelligent in a sense that you understand that you want to develop your senses, not to be slave of your senses, but develop your senses in the direction of serving Krishna. More you're in control of those choices. Actually, in that case, it's not you're a slave of them, but you're becoming master in that case. Then you're getting more and more choices on a more global level. Krishna will give you more trust. Can you say that?
Yes, you can say, but at
it's like this.
At the same time, when you get more trust from Krishna, and I think that that's a reality. I've seen how that works. When Krishna trusts you more, he gives you greater burdens, greater challenges, greater obstacles. the climbing a mountain, it just gets steeper as you get to the pinnacle of that mountain. I'll give you an example of trying to understand something. In 5.8, the Gita, Krishna says, whether seeing or hearing or touching or smelling or eating or walking or sleeping or breathing, the knower of the truth should think, I do nothing at all. So that would mean that I don't have any free will, because choosing itself is an action, right? So if I just were to read that 5.8 in Bhagavad Gita, I would think, oh, I'm not responsible for anything I do, because it's all happening by the will of the Supreme Lord and by the agency of the material nature. So I got nothing to do with anything. Whatever this body does, this mind does, has nothing to do with me. And that sounds very true, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
But it's not the whole picture. It's in the 5th chapter. You haven't gone through everything yet. So you don't understand. Just reading that verse, you have a partial understanding. And what do they say about wisdom? It's, a person who has a little knowledge, it's very dangerous, because, you don't have the whole picture. So in this case, it's an example of reading Prabhupada's books, which means hearing from Krishna and through the agency of the spiritual master who's giving it to you in a way that you can understand, but not fully understanding because you haven't completed your studies. If I want to be a doctor and I don't complete my studies, I'm not qualified. So that's why Prabhupada encouraged us, read my books every day for 1 hour, which I can't say that I've done. It's not easy, set aside an hour every day to study, especially if you're not a studious type. But here it is as an example of how people can malign the philosophy to suit their needs. See, I'm not responsible for what I do. I don't feel bad. That's psychopathic. Actually, later on, you find you are responsible. You do have the choice. It's just that you have to learn what those choices mean. You have to learn what actually the mode of goodness is, the pure, the sattva gun, pure mode of goodness is, and act accordingly. And you look at the examples of great spiritual acharyas for their examples, but still, when you look back in history at some of the things that the acharyas have done and you try to imitate that and don't follow the order of the acharya in your line, you're going to get into trouble, because you can't imitate, you have to follow. And follow means follow the orders of the spiritual authority. And then we have a compound problem, because we have this spiritual authority called the Uttama Adhikari, which is Srila Prabhupada, the person on the topmost level. And then we may have, I won't venture to judge, externally to judge. We have Kanishtas and Majjhima Adhikaris who are initiating people, and they cannot deliver what the Uttama Adhikari is given. And we have the previous examples of how a mat, such as ISKCON, is following in the footsteps of the Acharya, who is Prabhupada. There was a mistake right after Prabhupada left, when the self-anointed 11 gurus in ISKCON demanded to be called acharyas. That was finally abandoned after some years, after a lot of pushback. But devotees say, you're not the acharya. The acharya is Prabhupada. You're just, supposed to be initiating people because that's what's required. And we don't believe that you're on the Uttama platform. Just look at your behaviors. Ask yourself. So then that means that the chela, the student who's taking initiation, should look to the acharya for their main instruction and to their guru, who are on the platforms of maybe Madhya or Kanishta, for confirmation or further advice or counsel. But ultimately, one has to come to the conclusion that the acharya's standards are the standards by which we have to look at everybody. And that's difficult because we're thinking of ourselves, well, I'm conditioned, they're less conditioned. Maybe they're right and I'm wrong. So it's much more difficult for the second, third, fourth, and onward generations than it was for my generation, which simply, accepted Srila Prabhupada's teachings and tried to understand them, tried to imbibe them, tried to realize them. It's much more challenging, I think, for the present generation because you learn what guru is, and at the same time, you know that those gurus may or may not be, according to your realization, on a certain platform. And I won't pretend to judge because it's between the disciple and the guru. And the disciple's thinking, well, I'm not qualified. How do I know? I better rely on senior devotees to tell me that. But senior devotees are also, even Prabhupada disciples, bewildered in many ways by the situation. And the whole guru issue is still up for grabs. And now it's become an institutional kind of rubber stamp, but not really a rubber stamp. And we don't reject, but we don't accept. And it's all like word jugglery. And as I've told my wife many times, it's in your heart that you have to realize who is your guru and who's giving you good instructions. It's your responsibility. And therefore, that choice, which is really an expression of your own free will, influenced by Krishna's mercy, giving you realization, giving you vigyan of what direction to take. And we have had numerous examples of devotees who've taken initiation, the guru fell down, they took another initiation, the guru fell down, they took another. I mean, talk about challenging one's spiritual progress. That's got to be heartbreaking. And, very, very destructive to a person's spiritual, and people who made it through that and find, okay, I'm just going to depend on Prabhupada. They are to be really honored because that's a great challenge in Krishna consciousness. And it all has to do with our free will. Because we're making the decision whether or not to follow or not follow.
And if we assuming that Maya and modes of nature are on our side, whatever is happening, and they're still pushing us, even if we're falling and we're coming back and we're falling, coming back. We just need to keep doing this until we're getting to some kind of mass, quantitative mass that will finally put the balance on the side that we don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to fall anymore. And we're becoming more intelligent. And we're going back to God.
Very wise conclusion, yes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate Nrsimhananda. Thank you.
So I hope that sheds a little light onto the nature of free will. There's a lot more to discover in Srila Prabhupada. Go to Vanipedia, just type in free will, and you'll have a list of references by which you can study and realize how Prabhupada looked at it in different circumstances and at different times, how he expressed it. And when you see all that together, you kind of get, I think I get it now. I think I get it.
So it's important to be aware of what's happening around. Even if it's coming from your guru, again, we're still filtering it with our own understanding, awareness, right? Studying books of Prabhupada again, looking through that, and then we act.
You know, it's interesting. Prabhupada would tell devotees, some devotees, don't do this. They might want to take some kind of career choice, or and he would say, well, he wouldn't say don't. He would say it would be, but can you do this? He would offer alternatives. I'm thinking of one case in particular. I don't want to be specific, but this person went out and just was compelled to do this vocation, if you can call it that. And every time he tried to be successful at it, he failed. And he went through, he left ISKCON for years and just kept failing. Hope against hope. He kept trying this vocation, trying to, realize his dreams of making money in this way. And, thinking when I get money, I'll spend it, for distributing Prabhupada's books or building a temple, whatever it is they had in mind. But because they had not accepted Prabhupada's advice, they were frustrated. Maya would give them a little hope, and then, things would get stolen, or governments would come in and say, no, you don't have the right to do that, and this is ours. It's all kinds of things happened. And they never found that pot of gold, But nevertheless, they learned a golden lesson, and they ended up becoming a very big influence in our Krishna conscious ISKCON history. And so you can't even judge when people go away. You look at someone like Guru Gauranga, who went away for 30 years, became a lawyer. He was the president of the Swiss temple. He was very cherished by Srila Prabhupada, but things conspired that he ended up, when he was invited back to help with the New York temple, he ended up becoming so valuable that they made him a emeritus of the GBC.
Wow.
So you don't know. Krishna has us do things that are seemingly, they look like Maya is taking, but you don't know what really is coming forth from that.
So again, I'm getting this, like there is no logic, like human logic doesn't work here.
Exactly. That's exactly
Not linear.
the accurate conclusion. And I remember when I went to the opening of the temple in Las Vegas, I saw one of the artists I hadn't seen in a while, Charahasa, and he was in a wheelchair. And, I leaned over and said, geez, what happened? He said, I had a stroke, paralyzed one side of my body. Oh, I'm so sorry, Charahasa. I felt really bad for him. And he smiled, looked at me, said, oh, it's the best thing that ever happened in my life. That's Krishna consciousness.
That's Krishna consciousness. I'm into that. Nrsimhananda, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhupada. He's the one that inspires us to even ask these questions.
Thank you.